ready for our Facebook sharing. And so I would like to greet everyone. I'm Kim N, and I'm the president of the Dunes-Calumet Audubon. And I'm going to share a little information with you as we go through our evening's program. So, very exciting. This Saturday is Shorebirds in Lake County. So you're going to learn about shorebirds tonight, and then you can go out with Julie at 9 a.m., meeting at the Indiana Welcome Center. This Saturday, go ahead and register through Eventbrite, and that is on our website page. And then the next program in September, ooh, a new topic, trumpeters. History and future of one of North America's great conservation success stories. Ooh, I think we're going to learn more about the trumpeter swans than we knew before. I didn't know that was a conservation story. So Mr. Phelps will help us with that. And then, of course, in the beginning of September, we're going to be having our migration bird walks the first Saturday of the month. We'll be at the Dune State Park with Dan Baraball, and I believe that's meeting at the Wilson Shelter at 8 a.m. So look for that registration. And then the next day on Sunday, September 8th, we'll be with the National Park starting at 9 a.m. So it's an hour later. Meeting at the Indiana Dunes Visitor Center. You don't need registration, but it is helpful if you have a National Park pass for parking. And as always, our Dunes-Calumet merchandise is still available through Threadless. You know, I think there might be a way that you can sign up for emails. Sometimes they'll send me something that says, hey, you know, you can get that t-shirt for only $12. So you could maybe find a bargain getting a Dunes-Cal item. When in October, when we're in person, I think we're going to be having some of our hats available. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to go over shorebirds again. This is the start of their migration, and Michael will tell us a lot more about them. Anybody have any questions before we get started? If you do, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will be monitoring them. And those of you who are on Facebook joining us, go ahead and put a comment in there. And Matt Kawasinski, the vice president of Dunes-Calumet, will be monitoring that. So without further ado, Michael, you can get started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation, Dunes-Calumet Audubon presentation on shorebirds. I'm going to be giving out a lot of information, so I'm going to have to go a little quicker than I want on all these birds, but we're literally going to see literally all the birds that come through Northwest Indiana in migration. So what I'm going to do is give a couple ID hints on each one. There's a lot of good apps out there and books, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on ID tips. But what I really kind of want to do is kind of give a couple of natural history facts, kind of cool facts about each bird that kind of separate them from the other birds. I think shorebirds and really all birds, there should be more than just a little checklist on your list and go on to the next one. I think you should know a little bit more about them. So I'll try to inject a little bit of cool facts about some of these birds. And so we're going to get started here. There's the shorebirds title page. And we're going to start here with a bird that probably needs no introduction. It's one of the 5 plovers that are going to, plover species that are going to be coming through Northwest Indiana here. And this is, of course, the killdeer. It has that double breast band. They're an abundant bird. They're our most common shorebird here in the Dunes-Cal area. Plovers have a kind of a unique function when their motion, they do that stop and start motion, kind of like a robin does. So even from a great distance down the beach or across the mudflat, you can usually tell how they go. Here's a plover nest. Basically, when they nest out in the open, and they kind of use camouflage and deception as their strategy for nesting. Um, the eggs are kind of out in the open, and so they kind of camouflage. You can see how they're spotted. And the deception is they do that broken wing act that I think literally all of us have seen, where the adult will basically act like it's injured and try to lead the predator away, whether it's a dog or a person or whatever, try to lead it away, get it far enough away from the nest, and then basically circle around back to the nest. For me, actually, killdeers are one of the harbingers of spring. They show up in kind of late February, early March. So they're literally one of the first land birds that kind of come back on migration. So when I hear that loud killdeer song, I know that basically winter's kind of on the wane now, and maybe a month left of winter, and then we'll be into spring. So that's our first plover species that we wanted to look at. And there's a plover chick. That's what they look like. It takes about a month for them to go from the nest to being able to fly. And literally almost all shorebirds leave the nest within 24 hours because all except one nest on the ground. And I'll give that one out when we get down to it. So then again, there's 5 species of plover. The next one we're going to look at, the next 2 we're going to look at actually have are plovers with black bellies. This is the aptly named black-bellied plover. How you're going to separate this one from the next bird is you're going to look at the back in the breeding plumage. It kind of has that silver black pattern to it. And there's another way to tell it. That's what they look like in the fall. So they kind of lose that pattern. So that's the black-bellied plover. They're our largest plover, again, silver black. They're a very shy bird. In fact, we call them the sentinel bird because they're usually one of the first ones to get flushed. And usually they're pretty loud when they do it. So they take a lot of the other shorebirds with them. So it's pretty uncommon to get really close to these birds because, again, they're very wary. They're a cosmopolitan species. So they actually nest on both hemispheres, both the east hemisphere and the western hemisphere. And they actually winter on 6 continents. So that's an adult in the fall. This is a juvenile bird. They'll be coming through now. Shorebirds actually, the adults leave first. So we see them here first in migration, and they're followed by the juveniles, which come later. There's usually a little window of overlap where we get both adults and juveniles at the same time in kind of the middle of their window. But as we get further into the season, I've seen adults already this fall, but I have not yet seen a juvenile, but that should be coming close. So that's a juvenile. Most of the adults, you can get them anywhere. Lake Michigan's a good place, but any wetland areas will have adults. It seemed like the juveniles are much more common on Lake Michigan. So they'll be coming through soon. So that's a juvenile. And another way to tell it from the next bird, which also has a plover with a black belly, is those armpits. Black belly plovers, when they fly, have these, as you can see, have these dark armpits underneath of them. So that's another way that you can tell it from the next bird, which is American golden plovers. So you can see that's a lot difference on the back. They don't have that silvery color that the black-bellied plovers have. They have that golden kind of flaked, spotted color on the back. I took these at Miller Beach. Here's a bunch of them staging. Another difference between the black bellies and the American golden plovers is that black bellies usually go in really small groups, 3 or 4, maybe 6. Very rarely do you see them in double digits. And you can get that in golden plovers too, but especially in the fall when there's less of them. But in the spring, they usually go in these gigantic flocks. They're more common for a little bit further south here. In Newton County, kind of in the Kankakee River basin area. They like to congregate in large farm fields, freshly plowed farm fields where they're chasing insects down. So we look for those in the spring. American gold plovers and a few other sandpipers have basically go on elliptical migration patterns. So they use a different flyway in the spring than what they use in the fall. So in the spring, they use our Mississippi flyway. So we get a lot of them here in the spring. In the fall, they use the Atlantic flyway. So we get much less of them here in the fall. In fact, many of the plovers basically they leave like New England, they'll leave and head for South America then. Because it's actually South America's not south of us, it's actually well southeast of us. In fact, if you drew a line from here straight south, you'd end up in the Pacific Ocean, not in South America. So these birds take off from the mid-Atlantic coast, from the Atlantic coast, and they fly. It's a quicker shot over to South America. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is one of those long distant migrants. They literally do nearly 10,000 miles a season. So a yearly mileage of about 20,000 miles. So that's the plover. There's the juvenile. You can see it kind of has still a little bit of golden in it, as opposed to the black belly plover. Again, they'll be coming pretty soon. You can also see they have like a white supercilium or eyebrow. And here's a pair. There's on the left is a juvenile black-bellied plover, and on the right is a juvenile American golden plover. Our next plover species is the semi-palmated plover. And they're actually called semi-palmated because between their toes, they actually have some webbing. About a third of the way down, all the way back to the foot, there's some webbing there. So that's the term where they get semi-palmated from. They're about 2/3 the size of a killdeer. They have a single breast band, not a double breast band, and they're migrants here. They're not summer residents. They're pretty common in migration. Their fall windows about July through October. Again, the adult birds come first and the juveniles come second. They're an Arctic breeder and they breed on the coast. They winter on the coast of South America. So that's the semi-palmated plover. And again, they're coming through now. And they have that webbing on their feet, kind of like we have snowshoes to walk through the snow. They use that to help walk on wet sand and mud flats. There's a juvenile bird, finely patterned. I'll go into a little bit more about adults and juveniles later and how to tell them apart. But you can see that fine pattern on that juvenile semi-palmated plover. The final plover that we're going to do, well, maybe we'll see at the end. I might sneak in another one, but is one of my favorite shorebirds, and it's of course the piping plover. It's our smallest plover. It's only about 7 inches. It actually used to nest here up in Gary, up in Long Miller Beach, up until about the 1950s. And then beach disturbance basically extirpated them from Indiana. They nest in the prairie pothole regions to the northwest of here, but most of the birds we get here are from the Great Lakes population, and a majority of those are from Sleeping Bear Dunes up in Michigan. I've probably seen dozens, and look at all the jewelry on the legs of this piping plover, pretty amazing. This one was from Sleeping Bear Dunes. They put different jewelry on each one each year, and they can tell what nest they're from, and the band numbers tell which bird it is in that nest. So each year they do that. This year, okay, first of all, they're federally endangered. The Great Lakes population, the Atlantic population is threatened. So if you see the bands, you can send them to the Piper Plover Rescue, and they'll send you back some information on it. I've seen 4 piping plovers this year. One of them was unbanded, and the other 3 were banded. One was from Green Bay in Wisconsin. The other 2 were from Sleeping Bear Dunes up in Michigan. I've had 2 from Ontario, and I actually had 1 from Saskatchewan that was banded. So that's our piping plover. Again, the name piping plovers, they give this soft piping call when they're in flight. It's very plaintive, it's very pleasant, and sometimes you actually hear them before you see them, because you can see they blend in very well with the sand, especially on the upper dunes where they sometimes hang out. So that's kind of it for the plovers. There's a juvenile plover. You see all that little jewelry on its legs, again, telling it where it's from. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the people, the staff, and the volunteers that monitor these plovers. They do yeoman's work up there, and they're basically helping keep this plover from becoming extinct, basically. The last time I saw it was at least a few years ago, so that number is probably ballpark, but not exact. There's only about 12,000 piping plovers left. And again, That was a few years ago I saw that number, so I'm sure it's probably changed, hopefully for the better. So we're going to move on from the plovers, and we're going to go to the next bird, and these are the sandpipers. The first bird we're going to look at here is a American avocet, a tall bird. So shorebirds kind of have two adaptations that they have. Their bill shapes and lengths and sizes, and their legs lengths. Basically, they can basically stay and feed in the same areas, in the same habitat, because they feed at different levels. These tall waders, like American avocets, could go out in taller water. The medium-sized birds with medium-sized legs could have feed in shallower water. And some of the birds with the short legs basically don't go in the water. They just feed on the edges and into the mud flats. So this is the American avocet, has that distinctive looking bill. I'm going to give you a little better look at it. Look at that long bill. What they basically do is go along the bottom and shake the bill back and forth, trying to bring up aquatic insects and invertebrate. And they also use it to snap insects off the water, top of the water. So it's a pretty distinctive bird, pretty easy to tell. They have a black and white body. This is what they look like in the spring. They kind of have a peachy kind of throat and chest, but in the winter and late migrants coming through look like this. They're mostly white. So they have that unique bill. There was an eastern population. Unfortunately, it was hunted to extinction like in the 19th century. So these birds were out in the prairie pothole region, and there's still plenty of them out there. So we get them coming through in migration. You can get them anywhere, but usually the best place I usually see them is up on Lake Michigan. You can kind of see that. And there's another look at that long, kind of impressive bill. So that's the American avocet. They're coming through now. Their window's July through October, so they have a really wide window, but weeks go by and even sometimes a month go by when we don't really see them. So next bird here is another long-legged bird. It's called the black-necked stilt. It's kind of an interesting bird. The legs are quite long. In fact, proportionally, with the exception of the flamingo, the legs to body proportions are actually the second longest legs in the birding world. They stand roughly, these birds stand about 16 to 18 inches tall. Again, having these long legs, they can wade out and basically get food that the other shorebirds can't get. They're kind of a rare bird here. They've done multiple attempts to breed here. Years ago, a couple times they tried to breed in 129th Street up there in Whiting. One time they were even literally sitting on a nest, but it quickly got flooded by heavy rains. This year there was a family pair in Cedar Lake, which is in Central Lake County here in Indiana. And there were juvenile birds in there. So undoubtedly they nested somewhere around there. So that would be like literally the first confirmed Lake County nest. And so hopefully they'll keep coming back and nesting here. But they're kind of an uncommon breeder in southwestern Indiana. If you go to Goose Pond and those areas down there, you could always get black-necked stilts down there. So pretty unmistakable. Move on to the next bird there. Again, there's the black neck. You can kind of see the black neck and those long legs on it. That's going to separate it from any other bird. Now we're going to go on to the western willet. There's two populations of willet. We have the western one that comes through here. There's an East Coast population that's coastal. I think eventually they're going to separate them. There's some field marks that separate them. And actually on their wintering grounds, the birds that come through here kind of winter in Florida and Mexico, the East Coast birds go down to South America. So there's a separation of like 15,000 miles between the eastern and the western population. So I think eventually they're going to separate it. And so this is the western willet. Pretty nondescript except for when they fly, and I'll show you that here in a second. They're kind of a medium sized with kind of grayish legs. Again, kind of nondescript. But there's how you can really tell them apart. They have these bold wing patterns when they fly. So they go from nondescript to very descript when they fly. So they usually come in these small flocks, you rarely kind of see them by themselves because they come by. Lake Michigan is the best place to see them, although you could get any shorebird anywhere, so you can't rule anything completely out. But if I'm looking for willets, I'm going to be looking up on Lake Michigan, Miller Beach, Michigan City Harbor, and the state park will have a few. But I'd say Miller Beach and Marquette Park and the Michigan City areas are the best place to look for willets. If you're looking for shorebirds, a great spot where you can kind of spot them is out on the breakwall at Michigan City. For the most part, they're not undisturbed out there, so we get really great shorebirds that tee up there and spend the better part of the day there. This is a juvenile willet. Look at how finely patterned that is. It's just, you can tell this juvenile has that fresh plumage on it. Again, they come through a little bit later. These birds are here in migration, and their window is usually July through into September, with again the adult birds coming first and then followed by the juveniles, but there's always some overlap in there. So that's the Western willet. The next two birds we want to look at are yellowlegs. There's two species of yellowlegs that come through here. First one is called the greater yellowlegs. You can see how kind of thick its legs are, and I'll show you the comparison. But the best way to tell it from the lesser yellowlegs is it has a two-toned bill. So larger legs, and you can see in this picture, you can see the kind of bicolored two-tone bill that it has, kind of long. It's also slightly upturned a little bit. They also, in another way to tell them apart is when they call, they give this 2-2-2. It's a 3-note call. The next bird's going to only give like 1 or 2 2-2 calls. So that's just another way to tell them apart. Another thing that yellowlegs tend to do is when they get nervous, they bob their heads and call incessantly. So you'll see them when they get nervous. If you get too close, they'll start bobbing their heads. This is a lesser yellowlegs. You can see that's it's just a straight black bill and much more thinner legs. There's the lesser, and there's the greater. You can see the two-tone long bill. And there's the lesser. You can see that straight, smaller bill. Lesser bill, they're about two-thirds the size of the greater yellowlegs. Much easier when they're together, which they often are in migration, feeding along rivers and streams and ponds and flooded farm fields. And you kind of rarely see them on Lake Michigan. They like mud flats much better than they do sand. So this is the lesser again. This is one of the birds where both males and females actually sit on the nest. But as soon as the chicks hatch, the females leave, start going south. Again, these birds have different adaptations for survival. The females are out of there and so the males tend to them. It's not kind of like robins that they have to feed them. Again, these chicks come out of the nest in less than 24 hours, and within hours they learn how to feed, and they basically can take care of themselves. The males there basically just to kind of protect them from predators. And then when the juvenile birds can fend for themselves, they leave and leave the juveniles there by themselves, which is more food. And the juveniles find their way back. It boggles the mind how these juvenile birds, basically, some of them go 20,000 miles or 10,000 miles and with no lead. So we still haven't completely figured out how they do it. There's like chemical reactions in the brain, magnetic fields, star fields, whatever. But it's mind-boggling how these birds do it. So anyway, this is a lesser. The next bird we're going to look at is a solitary. They're coming through now. You can see those spots on the breast. They kind of have those greenish legs. And a characteristic of this bird is they tend to nod their heads back and forth, up and down. Solitaries are called that because even though you might see a whole bunch of them in a feeding area, they migrate by themselves. So they're solitary migrants. Again, they teeter their head and neck back and forth, not the whole body. They're fairly common here in migration. I was over at Carlson the other day, which is in Highland, Lake County, and saw some birds there. So we kind of get them on migration here. Again, they're going to be peeking out. They usually come here. July and August is when we get most of our solitaries coming through. Again, solitary. Our next bird and our second most common shorebird here after the breeder here after the killdeer is the spotted sandpiper, aptly named. You can see those spots on the breast. They do fade in the fall. In fact, they go away in the fall. So just before migration, actually, those spots will be gone. A characteristic of the spotted sandpiper is they teeter their whole body. So they literally move their whole body up and down. And they also, characteristic is they fly stiff wing. So they don't really bring their wings above their bodies. They basically keep the wings below when they fly. So they kind of look stiff wing-like. They're pretty common nesters here. I always get a few at the break wall at US Steel, and as they are this year. So it's kind of fun to see the little chicks along the break wall. And then they fly out to the break wall to feed. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about something that a small percentage, maybe less than 5% of spotteds do, and it's called polyandry. And what polyandry means is that females can actually have more than one nest. So they'll pick a male, mate with him, and then lay the eggs, and then she's out of there. He tends to the eggs, and she goes and finds another male and mates with him, lays another nest, and they could do up to 3. I think the last thing I saw, about 5% of spotteds do this. So 95% do the traditional male-female thing. But it's called polyandry, so it's kind of interesting. It basically just gets female to lay more eggs and put more spotteds out there. So it's an adaptation that they have. At the end of this program, there's going to be a whole family. Okay, first of all, I should say only about 2% of the shorebirds do that in the world. So it's a small percentage. But at the end of this presentation, there's a whole family that do that. And they're actually going to take this to another level, which is kind of interesting to see. So at the end, I'll show you that. So this is what the spotteds look like in spring. And this is this is kind of a juvenile bird, but this is what they look like in the fall. They basically lose that pattern just before they leave. Spotterns here are usually here from about late April into October. So the next bird we want to look at is a little bit larger and definitely rare. It's a whimbrel. Lake Michigan is the place to see these. You're going to see that long down curved bill. Lucky for us, they're elliptical. So in the spring, we rarely see them because they're using the Atlantic flyway. But in the fall, they use the Mississippi flyway and Central flyway. So we get coming through here. They're basically an uncommon bird. Again, mostly seen on Lake Michigan. Their bills are down curved because basically when they in migration and on their wintering grounds, they go along the coastline mostly. And it's basically to pull out hermit crabs out of their burrows. So along the Atlantic coast and along the coast of South America, that's their main food source is hermit crabs. So they have adapted that bill to basically go into the burrows and pull that out. So that bird is the whimbrel. Again, has that long down curved bill and stripes on the head. Next two birds we're going to look at are godwits. This is a marbled godwit. It's actually quite large. It's about 20 inches tall, and it's actually our largest shorebird that comes through here. They have those two-toned upturned bills. They actually use those bills to probe in water, and sometimes they'll actually go up to their face to show you how deep they'll go into the mud and into the water to look for food. These are short distant migrants. They nest in the Canadian prairies and they winter along the Gulf Coast and into Mexico. So they don't do those 20,000 mile year-round trips. There's more, it's like 1,000-mile year-round trip. They're kind of unique among shorebirds. A cool fact about them is that they nest in loose colonies. Of course, more shorebirds kind of nest by themselves, but these birds will actually nest in loose colonies. Also, they tend to be very early migrants in the fall. They come here kind of in late June, and they basically, by Labor Day, they're mostly through. So we're already kind of past their peak. A great spot to see these birds are on Lake Michigan, and seems like one of the best spots on Lake Michigan is the breakwall at Michigan City. Again, they land there, they're undisturbed. The word gets out that they're there and people can go over and see them. Again, so this is our marbled godwit. Marble godwits fly, and it's going to help distinguish from the next bird. They have cinnamon underwings. So you can here's a flight shot of a marble godwit. Next bird is the Hudsonian godwit, kind of rare here. Again, you can see that kind of a robin kind of color breast to it. They're going to lose that in the fall. Again, a bicolored bill. I don't have a picture of one because they're pretty rare around here, but when their underwings actually have dark, kind of like willet type darkness to it on the wings, and that's going to help you separate it from the marble godwits. I see these birds mostly on Lake Michigan, although I've seen them other places too. On Lake Michigan, about 90 to 95% of the birds basically are flybys. They rarely land on the beach. So it's a banner day to get one on the beach. And I actually saw that our own Kim L had a picture of a Hudsonian godwit on the beach about maybe not even a month or so ago. So congratulations for that. Pretty hard to get those birds to land. They're one of those long distant migrants that do that 20,000 mile a year thing. It's kind of interesting because birds that do this basically have an endless summer. So there's about 6 to 8 shorebirds that do that long migration. And so again, they have an endless summer. They go from our summers to the South Hemisphere summers. So they actually see more daylight with the exception of Arctic terns than any other creatures on Earth. So they go from, again, from the high Arctic down all the way down to the southern part of South America. So if we think about it, the moon's about 240,000 miles away, roughly. So by its 12th birthday, this bird will have flown the equivalent, again, it's under a pound, of flying to the moon. Pretty amazing. Again, another one of those mind-boggling facts about these birds. So there's what they kind of look like in winter. Again, they lose that striping on the breast, or on that red color on the breast. Now we're going to get on to the smaller shorebirds. And when people say that shorebirds are just kind of brown jobs, no, not necessarily. Look at the color on this bird. It's called a ruddy turnstone. Has that harlequin face that kind of keys. They're going to lose a lot of that color. They're kind of orange legs. They're kind of squat birds. And yeah, like their names, they ruddy turnstones. They do turn stones and pebbles and vegetation to look for food. They're going to lose that color in the fall. I'll show you a picture of it. One of the cool facts about this bird is they're basically one of the very few shorebirds that'll eat carrion. So you can actually see them on eating dead fish that the gulls have left alone. Quick story, we had a ruddy turnstone. They're actually pretty hardy, and on the East Coast, they basically winter pretty far up the East Coast. We had a turnstone years ago, 10 years or so ago, that tried to winter up at BP. And this bird was very clever because there's a warm water discharge there that empties hot water into the Lake Michigan. So the stones and the rocks around it are actually pretty warm. So if birds in like January and into February, this bird literally at night would probably fly up, bruised up next to those stones, and then during the day flying down and eat carrion, eat dead fish on the beach. So it got to the point that it actually, when I wasn't seeing dead fish there, would bring a dead fish over from Whiting Park or bring a dead fish over from the Hammond Bird Sanctuary, kind of slice it up, even though the gulls would kind of take care of some of that. And sure enough, I'd come back the next day and there's that bird feeding on the carrion, the dead fish. So I literally got this bird to the end of February. I'm thinking, wow, in just maybe 2-3 weeks, we literally would have gotten this bird through the winter. But unfortunately, as it was, at the end of February, there's a lot of shelf ice. It was really cold winter. There's a lot of shelf ice out on Lake Michigan. And unfortunately, it blew all that shelf ice. We had 3 days of like really hard north winds, and it blew all that shelf ice onto the beach, even up into the vegetation. So unfortunately, that bird had nowhere to feed. So we almost got it through the winter. So anyway, that's my ruddy turnstone story. Kind of move on here, and that's what they look like in the wintertime in their as they're migrating through here in the fall. They still have some of that harlequin pattern. And it's a little hard to see, but they usually have a little brown up in the shoulder. Again, orange legs, squat bird. They'll be coming through here in the fall now. And we're their windows kind of like basically go into October in the fall. Okay, this is our latest migrant that comes through. It's called the purple sandpiper. Again, back in the olden days when they used to name birds, they used to shoot them and they'd have them in their hand. So some of the birds are just really poorly named. Ringneck duck, unless you have it in the hand, you can barely see that little purple ring around its neck. Red-bellied woodpecker, unless you get it just right, you really can't see the red belly on it. So there's definitely better field marks that they probably should have been named for. Well, if you look on the wing here, you can see a little bit of purple on the upper wing there, and that's what it was named for. Again, a lot of these birds were held in hand when they were named. So we love to call this bird the Thanksgiving bird because we really don't start looking for this bird until mid to late October. November, Thanksgiving, they kind of peak out into early December. On the East Coast, they literally winter all the way up into Canada on breakwalls and along the shore because the ocean doesn't ice up. So we rarely get them here into January. So they're usually gone by mid-December, but they're literally one of the last land birds that are migrating through. So this is called the purple sandpiper. And they tend to like breakwalls. I took this one at Whiting Park, but the breakwalls at Michigan City, Portage, Miller Beach, Hammond Marina, they tend to like to show up on those. So those are the places to be looking for those around Thanksgiving. There's another picture of a purple sandpiper standing in a nice little pile. Okay, the next bird I'm going to look at is the red nod. It's kind of a bittersweet bird because unfortunately these birds are threatened and they might have already been put on the endangered species list. They're dramatically declining. They're down like 80, 90% since like the 1990s. There's a few reasons for that. Okay, this is a juvenile bird. They have literally go up and down in the spring. They use the Atlantic flyway in the spring. In the fall, they use the Atlantic flyway, but a few of them come down here, mostly juvenile birds. So we get them in our Mississippi flyway. Took this at Miller Beach. I'm just seeing less and less of these birds. You can go out and sometimes see 2 or 3 of them, and now it's a treat just to even see just one. Again, they're dramatically declining. A couple of the reasons are, whether you agree with it or not, the oceans are getting warmer, probably due to global warming. And a big part of their diet, a major part of their diet are horseshoe crab eggs. So they literally time it coming from South America to time it to where the horseshoe crabs are laying their eggs. They show up in Delaware Bay, which is where most of them in the New Jersey, Delaware shore, where literally 90% of them come through, and they need to feast on those eggs to make it the rest of the way. So they show up there weighing about 4 ounces, and they gorge themselves and they get themselves up to about 8 or 9 ounces in order to make the rest of the trek up to the Arctic where they're going to nest. If they don't get past a certain demarcation line, which is about roughly 6 or 7 ounces, they will starve on the way up. So they won't make it. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was a really warm winter and the horseshoe crabs laid their eggs early. And so the tail end of the red knots that came up there just wasn't enough birds food for them to eat. So a lot of them starved on the way up. Another problem that they had, and they did legislation to protect this, fishermen love those horseshoe crab eggs because they use them for bait, but now they have limits on it. So hopefully that's going to help. So we'll see how it works out, but unfortunately, this might be one of those bird species that don't live to see the next century, but hopefully they can get things turned around. So this is a really gorgeous, beautiful red knot. Again, they're one of those birds that do that long migration and have the endless summer. They go from the North American summers to the South American summers. Here's another picture of a juvenile red knot. Okay, this is my other favorite bird, uh, shorebird. It's called the sanderling, aptly named because you mostly always see them on sand. Probably roughly 98% of the birds seen in Indiana are on the Lake Michigan shorelines. Um, they come here in July, and this is an adult bird, um, a May bird. They come here starting in July, and they'll literally stay to November. A lot of times when I do my little Miller Beach walks, 3, 4 miles, a lot of times this is the only migrant that's going to be on the beach. They're very common here now this time. So this, look how gorgeous that it is. Has that rusty head color, and they like sandy beaches. They're here from July. Uh, the the adults are coming now. I saw my first juvenile the other day. The adults start molting, so the beginning ones are kind of have this color. Towards the end, like in September, you can see the adults are molting into this as they head south. Okay, so here's a sanderling, a quick sanderling story. You can see the bands on it. Oh God, it's probably been 15 years ago. I got this picture at Miller Beach. The green bands mean that it was banded in Delaware Bay, which is on the Atlantic coast, again, New Jersey, Delaware. The yellow band and green band mean that it was banded in Chile in South America. So on its way back north again, I got this picture of this bird at Miller Beach in Gary, in Lake County. So I sent it in, and basically what they told me is that they banded 100 sanderlings. Um, all of them that showed up that they were able to get were on the East Coast, except for 3 of them. 2 of them were seen on Lake Erie, and then this one all the way west here on Lake Michigan. So this is the only bird that came up and was, so they were very glad to get this information that one of their banded birds from the East Coast made it all the way here over to Lake Michigan. So again, it's, citizen science. How fun is it? Okay, so this is what juvenile birds look like. Look at that finely pattern, black and white. I saw my first one earlier this week. There's going to be an overlap between the adults and the juveniles. Again, at some point here, probably later in September, that's mostly going to be juvenile birds. The adults will be through. Here's a flock of sanderlings going by. Sanderlings are true beachcombers. Again, you find them on the Lake Michigan beaches. So Miller Beach, Marquette, Michigan City Harbor, and the State Park are great spots to look for these birds. They stay so late into the fall. Basically, I took this bird in picture in early November that this juvenile bird looking here has already molted into its winter plumage. So you can see already, it's kind of a good way to show the different molting plumages of sandpipers. So this juvenile bird is already molted. The next bird we're going to look at here is the dunlin. I took this on Lake Michigan, but they love mudflats. Look at that long decurved bill on it. Spring birds have that black belly and red back. In fact, I have a lot of bird books antiquated books from like the turn of the last century, even a few birds from the 1800s. This bird was named the red back salamander. There's from my friends, sandpiper. But then they changed to dunlin, and apparently dun is a shade of gray, which is what they look like in the wintertime and when they come through here in the fall. So dunlins have these long decurved bills. They can migrate in quite large flocks. Some of the birds actually that nest up in the Arctic, not only use our 4 flyways to go south, but they use the Asian flyways. So some of the birds that come into Alaska will actually go spend their wintering grounds in Japan and China and Southeast Asia. So rather than come east and use our flyways to get south, they'll actually use the Asian flyways. So that's kind of an interesting fact about dunlin. There's another bird showing that red back and belly. This is what they look like in the fall. They have a little kind of a brown shoulder patch, but they're kind of more kind of brownish gray. But you can see that down decurved bill on it. Here's a flock of dunlin going by. Now we're going to get into the peeps. There's like 5 species of peeps. These peeps are small sandpipers. This is a semi-palmated, again, kind of like the plover. They have webbing, a little bit of webbing on their feet, on their toes, which again helps them walk in mud and wet sand. They kind of have grayish backs. They have black legs or dark legs and basically straight bills. They're only about 6 to 6.5 inches long, so they're very small birds. Here's kind of a juvenile bird showing its legs. Again, another one of these birds that do those long migrations to South America and basically get the endless summers going. So this is the semi-palmated sandpiper, pretty common on mud flats. Had a bunch of them over at Carlson the other day, but if you can find mud flats, they like those. Our smallest bird, shorebird in the world, the least sandpiper. Look at those kind of greenish yellow legs. That's going to separate it from the dark-legged semis. These sandpipers are only about 6 inches long, roughly the size of a house sparrow with a little bit longer legs. They tend to love mud flats too. You can see sometimes they actually go a little bit in, and so their legs can be darker. So don't be fooled by that. They tend to be there. You'll see birds standing on one leg, and that's to conserve energy, basically. So you see a lot of these peeps do that. So this is the least sandpiper. So there's a genetic variation of birds, kind of a mutation. It's called leucistic. Most birds have it. This is a leucistic least sandpiper. And basically what it is it's lost a lot of its plumage color. They're not albinos, but they've lost a lot of their pigmentation. So they can be kind of white colored or brown. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because just another interesting fact about the shorebirds is that some of them are, a small percentage of them are going to be leucistic. And there's another least sandpiper, a juvenile bird showing its legs, green legs. And you're going to look at that bill. It's not stout like the semis. It's going to be a little bit curved on the end. A western sandpiper. Okay, this is kind of an interesting bird. Back in the 80s when I was doing a lot of birding, we could always get good 6 or 8 western sandpipers a season. Well, that's not true anymore. They've literally disappeared from the our Northwest Indiana beaches. I took this about 5, 6 years ago. I'd get 5 or 6 a year, and now I might get one every 5 or 6 years. They're incredibly rare. I'm not sure why that's happening because they're still abundant on the West Coast. So maybe there's somewhat of a migration shift in their patterns, much less common. Look at that thick bill and that brown patch on its shoulder. That's going to help separate it from the other 2 peeps that we have. Again, much less common bird that we get here. There's another picture of it. I took it again, this at Miller Beach. So it's a banner day when we find western sandpipers in Indiana. Although they get more of them in Southwest, there's a crew of diligent birders that do shorebird counts down there, and they usually get a few of them down there. So it's always kind of like watching their reports because it's always kind of pleasant to see that they get some western sandpipers on their counts down there. Cane Ridge, I think they do them at Goose Pond. So they do a good job of that down there by monitoring the shorebirds. So we always get a few in this state, but most of them are down there. The next sandpiper that we're going to look at, a little bit larger of the peeps, is called the Baird sandpiper. It's named after Alexander Baird, who was a head of the Smithsonian in the 1900s, Smithsonian Museum for decades in the 1900s. He was a friend of Audubon and Wilson, who named a lot of the birds that we have now. The way you want to tell, this is an adult bird. Probably 3/4 of the Baird sandpipers we get are juveniles. Look at that long bill. It's going to be bigger than the birds the peeps that it associates with. But you want to look at that long elongated tail feathers. They go beyond the tail. You can see how it sticks out there. So this is a adult. Here's a juvenile. I just got a picture of one earlier this week. Look how long those tail feathers extend beyond the tail. Again, dark legs. This is a juvenile. Look how finely patterned it is. Um, Beards are coming through now, especially the juveniles. So it's called a Baird sandpiper. Baird sandpipers come through in the fall. I don't even know that we have any records in the spring. Just go back to it really quick. They do that elliptical migration thing where we get them here in the fall, but they use the other flyways, the Atlantic flyway in the spring. So again, we have few, if any, records in the spring. The opposite of that is a bird that also has an elliptical migration, but we get these in the spring. They're somewhat much rarer in the fall. And this is called the white rump sandpiper. They have that kind of speckling down the throat and on the sides. The best way to tell it is in flight. They have white rumps. All the pictures you're seeing tonight are mine, so there's no copyright infringement. I probably should have said that at the beginning. But I see that I'm going to have to work on this one. I remember when I took this picture, there were some kids jumping around and they flushed this bird before I had a chance to get a better picture. They're uncommon, but we always get some here in the spring. So this is the white-rumped sandpiper. Again, when they fly, they have white rumps. You can see their white rumps. And they're another one of those birds that do those long-distance marathon migrations. So it's a little bit larger peep than the two smaller ones. This is probably our largest peep, if you want to call it that. It's called the pectoral sandpiper. Its nickname used to be called the grass snipe because you mostly see them on mud flats and along grassy areas. You're going to tell them by their distinctive breast pattern. Look at that, how it has that streaked bib that comes down the neck and ends abruptly on the belly. They're kind of a medium-sized bird, shorebird with green legs. They're also circumpolar. They breed here in our Arctic and they also breed on the other side in the Eastern Hemisphere in like the Russian Arctic. They prefer wet fields and grassy meadows and mud flats, so you rarely see them on Lake Michigan unless they're flying by. Their windows are July through August, and the juveniles are kind of September and October. So basically you have two migration windows there. And so I'm going to find these birds on mudflats, and they're called pectorals. There's another picture. I took these pictures over at Carlson in Hammond Highland. Here's a shorebird that's rarely you're going to ever see on the shore. Again, this is another bird that's just drastically decreasing. It's called the upland sandpiper, and you're going to go look out in farm fields and farm meadows to find this bird. Took this in Newton County. They've drastically declined. A lot of it has to do with their wintering grounds in South America. They nest in winter in the grasslands down there, and a lot of that's just being taken up now. Much of it is being taken up now for farmlands. So they're losing their winter habitat. They're also kind of losing their summer habitat when they breed here because farmers used to have pretty thick fence rows, and now a lot of them basically go ditch to ditch or road to road with much smaller fence rows where these birds can nest. You used to be able to go down to Newton County and pretty easily find 2 or 3 pairs like in the 80s and 90s. In fact, even around here in Lake County, there used to be a few pairs that would nest up at the Gary Airport. And that hasn't happened for a while, and it's never going to happen again. Again, these birds are just drastically decreasing. They're even rarer on the state now. I think they almost kind of make the rare bird alerts now when you find them on state. Certainly they're going to get reported to Discord when you find them. So these are shorebirds of the prairies, basically. And it's kind of interesting because they basically are here for just a short time. So we like to say that these birds come here for the summer, but actually they spend about 7 or 8 months down in South America. So it'd be almost more correct to say that they spend their winters up here because they spend their summers down in South America. Warblers, that's kind of why they do it. There's just less competition down there, up here than doing that. So this is the upland sandpiper. There's another picture of it. Another bird that's drastically declining is a buff-breasted sandpiper. Used to see a lot of these, and I just see a lot less of them now. It's a medium-sized shorebird. They have that buff breast. They have a kind of a clear face. This is a juvenile bird. You can see by the pattern, the finely patterned back on it. They have that kind of doe-eyed look to them, kind of almost dove-like. They too have an elliptical migration. In spring, they tend to go up the East Coast. In the fall, we get them here coming down the Mississippi Flyway. Drastically decreased again because of a lot of their wintering grounds are being developed. An interesting thing about these birds is when they nest up in the Arctic, they've used lek styles, mating rituals, kind of like grouse. So the males will all get together and perform, and then the females will pick out a male and mate with them. But unlike grouse, usually it's just one and one. So there's usually a male for every female, but females tend to pick out the males, but they use the lek system, which is kind of interesting fact about these birds. There's another picture of the buffy that I took on buff-breasted sandpipers that I took at Miller Beach. Again, drastically declining. I've seen numbers like roughly less than 10,000 of them left. Okay, we're going to go through the dowitchers now. There's two species of dowitcher. This is the long-billed dowitcher. And kind of tell you ways to tell them apart. If you look on the back, you're going to see kind of on the black and white pattern on the back, and you're also going to see a lot of striping on the side. The difference between long-billed and short-billed dowitcher, one of the worst things that you can use is a poor way to use it, tell them apart, is the length of the bill, because there could be overlap there. So this is a spring long-billed. This is kind of what they look like in the fall. They look like much grayer as they get into the season. Again, you're kind of going to look at the back of it. Really, the best way, and the way that I like to use is they're quite vocal. So voice is the best way to tell them apart. They have different call notes. The long-bills have this kind of a screechy keek, keek, keek call. And the short-bills have this kind of a staccato 222 call. So in flight, they're quite easily to tell apart. An interesting fact about long-billed dowitchers is that they nest up in kind of the Alaska. Most of the shorebirds that we get here that nest up in the Arctic come from the west, like Alaska and Western Canada. Even though a lot of them stage in Hudson Bay to the east of us, most of those birds just go down the Atlantic Flyway. So we don't get too many of them there. Most of the shorebirds that we get here are kind of in Central and Western Canada and Alaska. But in the case of long-billed dowitchers, some of those dowitchers actually go over the Bering Straits and nest in Siberia. So they nest in Siberia, then they come back over the Bering Straits and come through our area. So some of the long-billed dowitchers that we could see here in the spring and fall actually could be nesting in Siberia. So that's kind of an interesting fact about long-billed dowitchers. There's another picture of one in fall. This is a spring plumaged short-billed dowitcher. If you kind of look at the pattern on the back, there's not nearly as much white as you got with the long-billed. In fact, it's mostly tan colored on the upper wing feathers, much less striping on the flanks as you had with the long-billed. Let's go back really quick, show you that long. Look at all that striping. So there are three subspecies, of short-billed dowitcher. I think eventually, like the willet, they're going to split these apart. The subspecies look different. I'm going to actually show you one here, a different one in a second here. We have the prairie. There's the eastern short-billed, there's the Pacific short-billed, but we have the prairie that comes through here. Dowitchers prefer mud flats. They have these long bills that they use to probe in the water. And at the very end of the bills, they have sensories where they can sense movement. So it helps them to grab their prey. So they stick those long bills in the water and basically go go through the water. Dowitcher style of feeding is basically sewing machine-like. They walk forward and kind of like the old-fashioned sewing machines, they probe up and down, up and down, up and down as they walk forward. So only one other shorebird does that. So it's called the Dowitcher type of feeding by going forward. Another way to kind of tell the Dowitchers apart, longbills come second, shortbills come first. Their window for our shortbills are roughly July and August. By Labor Day, after Labor Day, shortbills are kind of getting few and far between. When opposite, September and October are the migration window for longbills. So even though there can be some overlap, that's another way that you can help tell them apart is actually when you find them. So this is here's a juvenile long-billed again. I'm sorry, short-billed dowitcher. Took this up in Hammond. And it's kind of interesting because long-bills and short-bills were considered the single species until about 1950 when they split them. This is an eastern short-billed. I took this over at Carlson. Obviously, it looks much different than the prairie. But this is a spring eastern. I think they're going to separate it. I took this picture at Carlson in Highland, sent it to one of my shorebirding friends on the East Coast, and he confirmed that it's an eastern. So I put that in an eBird as an eastern. So if they ever separate it, we've already got a record. There's another one. The next bird we're going to look at is the still sandpiper. Again, it kind of looks like a yellowlegs, but unlike the yellowlegs that has an upturned or straight bill, this bird's down curved. You're going to see that little brown patch behind the eye, and they too feed like dowitchers up and down. Much more common in the fall than we get in the spring. Again, another one of those elliptical migration patterns. They have their legs are they're not yellow. They're kind of more a greenish color. And again, there's another still. You can kind of see that patch behind it and those kind of greenish legs. Next bird we're going to look at we're going to move on to the Wilson snipe. Most of my old birds used to call them common snipe, but they're named after Alexander Wilson, who's basically thought of being as the father of ornithology. He's kind of in the early 1800s. He did the first books on them. In fact, he was the mentor to Audubon and a lot of those kind of later ornithologists that would come later. It's called the Wilson's Fowler. Wilson's has basically Alexander Wilson has four names, birds that are named after him: the phalarope, the warbler, the storm petrel, and the Wilson snipe. And they actually named him after he died. He died at like a young age, at like 46. So in his honor, they named all these birds after him because, again, he was thought of being the father of ornithology. So this is the Wilson snipe. Again, you mostly find these birds on mud flats. And what do they do with that big bill? Well, that's what they do. Again, they have sensory perception on the tips of their bills where they can feel movement. And so they're probing through the mud to look for birds like that. So one quick story about Wilson snipe is, so back in the olden days when people used to hunt for food, Wilson snipe are difficult to shoot because when they take off, they fly off in a zigzag pattern. So if you came back with some common snipe or Wilson snipe, as they're called now, in your bag, you were thought to be basically a sharpshooter, or they would call you a sniper. So when you hear the term sniper, it's basically a sharpshooter. And it's named after this kind of inert little shorebird because they were so difficult to shoot that you had to be a really good shot. So definitions kind of changed a little bit, but yeah, sniper means sharpshooter. So it's named after this bird. American woodcock, we're going to look at this bird again. Not really a shorebird, bird of the woodlands. Timber doodle, they have these bars across the head. When flushed, their camouflage is so well that you actually flush way more than you ever see. They blend in so well with leaves, they're hard to see. they're kind of a twilight bird. I think most of us have heard about their mating ritual of at dusk and dawn going up in the air and doing that pet call and then coming down. I did some um, spring birding on the Green Tower, and so I would get there before dawn, and I was serenaded by woodcocks calling. It was quite interesting. So it was kind of a nice greeting for me when I'd go up on the Green Tower to do those watches up there. So this is the American woodcock. Again, the twilight bird. Now the last kind of set of birds that we're going to look at kind of here are the phalaropes. So this is a very interesting group. Earlier I talked about polyandry, where the females are dominant. Well, these take it to a step further. The females are more brightly colored than the males. So not only will they defend a nest, they'll defend a couple of nests. They breed with more than one male. And here's a female, and here's a male. So this is one of the rare cases where the males, because they sit on the nest, aren't brightly colored as the females. So there's the female. This bird is the Wilson's phalarope. It's our prairie phalarope. They mostly nest west of here. They probably a few nest down at Kankakee Sands. I know when Kankakee Sands first kind of opened up and they were doing a lot of burning down there, the prairie grass hadn't quite got to long grass prairie where they wanted it. And so there was a lot of short grass there, and there was multiple Wilson's phalaropes nesting there. I remember one time I counted 17 birds down there in one trip. So again, this is a polyandry bird. In fact, it fooled them for so long that if you look at some of Audubon's prints, he actually mislabeled male and females because they hadn't done the research yet to know that the males are in there. So here's a male and female Wilson's phalarope. Again, it's our prairie phalarope. Our next two birds are actually pelagic birds, and pelagic birds means they're ocean birds. This is the redneck phalarope. It's kind of a spring version of it. Again, they nest up in the high Arctic. They're very rare here in the summer. We might get a few, much more common in the fall. But a lot of these pelagic phalaropes, this and the next one, basically they nest in the high Arctic and they immediately head east and go out into the oceans. So they spend roughly 80 to 90% of their time in the ocean. So they're pretty special to see them here. We get a few more rednecks than the next bird that comes through. Again, the males sit on the nest and they're polyandry. And this is what they look like in the fall. So they lose that red color. And you're going to separate it from the next bird by that stripes on its back. You can see that kind of yellow stripes on its back. So this is the redneck phalarope. And the last phalarope that we're going to look at is the red phalarope. Very, very hard to get here. It took me, God, like 20 years to kind of get this picture. One day I was walking down Lake Michigan. I look, and these birds like to spin to basically bring up the invertebrate and aquatic insects that they like to eat. And so I looked down the beach and saw this bird spinning, and it was kind of late in the season. And I thought, wow, this could be what I was looking for. And there it was, my holy grail, basically, of phalaropes, a red phalarope. It's the only bird that I don't have a picture of in the spring. We get very few records of them in the spring. And the few that they had, I was probably working that day. I couldn't get a picture of it. So these are phalaropes. And again, they spend roughly 9 months of their year out on the open ocean. And they winter kind of off the coast of South America. So they're even kind of somewhat rare going down our coastlines. So they get out into the oceans. Here's another picture of it. And it's kind of a famous bird because a quick story, Pete Rubin and I had a deal that whichever one could find a phalarope on the beach to call him. So I called him. The bird takes off, flies to the north. I thought, oh no, it's gone. He gets there, but right as he gets there, the bird flies back. So he got some nice pictures of it. So if you ever go to the nature center and see those shorebird pictures of Pete Rube, the excellent pictures that he's taken, his phalarope, red phalarope picture is this bird right here. So I'm going to just take just a couple of more minutes and before I come back to the website I'm not really sure how these are showing, but I just put down, but these are rare shorebirds that have showed up here in Indiana, taken mostly in Northwest Indiana. Um, this is called a ruff. I've seen two ruffs in Indiana. This one was taken at Kingsbury, so in LaPorte County. The other one I saw was in South Lake County in the 90s, and there's three color morphs. There's blonde, which is white, brown, and this is a black one. So these are birds that are Eurasian. These are birds that come over from Europe. Again, shorebirds are such long distance migrants that we get some of these shorebirds coming over from Europe and Asia. Here's another bird that's quite rare. This is a plover. To kind of give you an idea where it's from, it's called the lesser sand plover, but its original name was Siberian plover. To kind of give you an idea where it comes, it's a bird from Asia. This bird showed up at Michigan City Harbor. Some of us got a picture of it. And so this bird was actually, that I took the picture from, was weeks later at West Beach. So Jeff McCoy calls me, and if you know who he is, he's a great birder from Indiana. He calls me at work and says, "Hey, I'm going to be at Miller Beach today. You headed there after work?" Well, I worked at USDL. It's right down the road from, I said, "Yeah, I'll meet you there." And then he goes, "Wait, hold on a minute. Let me call you back." Like, what? I go, okay. He calls me back and said, "No, we're not going to Miller. You're coming to West Beach." I refound the lesser sand plover. So weeks later, it was refound at West Beach. So here's a picture of it. Bird number 3. Okay, it's called a redneck stint. It's one of the Asian stints, Eurasian stints. Quick story. There's an effect called the Patagonia effect. It's a picnic table on the Mexican Arizona border. It's just on this side in Arizona. Some famous birder, like in the late 70s, went down. He was going to go into Mexico, but he pulled over to this picnic table again inside of Mexico. Pulls over and he finds a rare bird there. It was only the second United States record of this bird right there. So back then he had to go to a phone booth, and he's making all these calls, and all these birds converge on this little picnic area in southeastern Arizona. Well, that bird wasn't there, but they found a first United States record bird there. So the Patagonia effect is a bird where you go to find a rare bird. It may not be there, but you find an even rarer bird. So we went there to go look for a curlew sandpiper, which this is in Wakarusa, by the way, over by South Bend. We go there to look for curlew sandpiper, is not there. However, this bird is there. And there's some really expert birders there. And basically, we were all kind of looking at this bird, and we were all kind of puzzled at it. And they're asking me, "Was it look like a sanderling?" "Oh, no, it doesn't look like a sanderling." "Well, what do you think it is?" And we're like, "Well, we know what it's not. We just don't know what it is." So while I was digiscoping some pictures, and another guy had a camera there, he's taking pictures. We wanted to make sure we had pictures in case, we could look at it later. They went to the back of this band, and this guy had a shorebird back there, and he pulled it out, kind of shows everybody, kind of comes up to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, this looks like a redneck stint." So it's the only state record that we have of a redneck stint. Bird number 3, and some of you are going to recognize this. It's a wandering tattler. This is a bird from the West Coast. This is taken from the Michigan City breakwall. Got a call, got over there. Apparently it was seen on the front side of the breakwall most of the morning, but then it went on the back side. We were there hours and hours waiting for this bird, and it would not show up. But then, almost out of nowhere, it popped up on the front end. Unfortunately, it was like probably less than a minute that it showed up before it went back on the other side of the breakwall. Some of us got to see it, but there's a fair amount of people that never actually got to see it. But I was very lucky to get a picture of it. It's a horrible picture, but I was just very happy to get that picture. And the last one I want to look at, I have another one. It's a bar-tailed, but it's horrible. I'm not going to show it. This is a spotted redshank. Again, one of those Eurasian birds. This is for my downstate friends that might be watching. This was taken at Goose Pond. So it's a spotted redshank. Again, it's kind of why we do some of these birds. I mean, we enjoy the common birds, but it's once in a while, it's just a lot of fun to see a rare bird. Okay, I'm going to wind things up here. Here's my website. If you can see it there, if you want to snapshot it or take a picture. I have a lot of birds on there. I added all the female birds now and the juvenile birds. I have roughly, I'm going to say around 370 birds that I photographed in Indiana. So if you want to go there, There's the website. So if you want to see more pictures of the shorebirds, or you want to see warblers or ducks or finches or whatever, gulls, have a lot of different plumages there. So that's pretty much, there's the website. Probably, hopefully I've talked long enough so that you can get that. So with that, I think I can wrap things up. Sorry, I went a little bit long, but a lot of information out there.
Yeah,
So,
no problem.
and I want to thank all of you for joining me, and hopefully you enjoyed your evening with the shorebirds. So, okay,
We,
I'm wrap it up and hand it over to Kim. So again, thank
o-
you for joining me.
okay, we do have a question. For the
Okay,
birds that go summer to summer, do they also breed when in their winter habitat?
they do not. They do not. So, like, I'll use tanagers as an example. There's probably 300 species of tanagers in South America. They do breed down there, but we have two of those tanagers get out of there and they come here in their winter. Of course, we have the summer and the scarlet tanager that breed here. There's little no competition from other tanagers, the western tanagers out west. So they basically come up here to breed, but no, they do not do double breeds. They come up here in what's their winter, our summer to breed, and then they go back and spend their summer down there. So no, they do not breed. That's a very good question, though.
Okay. Well, you have an impressive collection of photos, and people are sending lots of comments saying thank you for such a comprehensive and interesting presentation. They've really enjoyed your talk, so thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
Yep.
shorebirds are they're such fascinating creatures that they're just kind of fun to learn about and fun to talk about. And I just kind of scratched the surface on some of these. There's so much more information out there. So,
Well,
okay.
I've been studying shorebirds for a while, and I still have written down some interesting notes about them. Because there are quite a few. I mean, you covered,
All of them, basically.
yeah, I stopped counting after 22.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like 35, 36, something like that. Um,
Okay.
Most of them, we get most of them every year, but sometimes there's a year goes by when some of the rare ones we just don't really see them. But these are the ones that come through. And then I kind of at the end, I just had some fun by throwing on some of the rare birds that we've seen. Again, nothing excites
Hmm.
you more than finding a rare bird. So, and
Yes, and
all those were taken in Indiana. So,
that is kind of fun to see about see and hear the extra special rare birds that you have gotten to see. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
inspiring. So now we just need to get out to Lake Michigan, the grassy mud flats.
Right. And there's they come and go as the rains come and go. So I hope people can find their own spot. South County has a lot of flooded fields and some are more flooded than others, so some stay longer and then rains come and so you have to kind of drive around a little bit to find them. But yeah, especially kind of South County areas, there's a lot of great shorebird habitat down there and just kind of find them.
Great. And one of our followers today lives in central Indiana, so this was a real treat for them since they don't get to the shorelines to see this collection of photos.
Yeah.
Another one of our participants said, you are such an amazing birder and have shared so much knowledge today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank them.
Yay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And be sure to check out our Facebook and our website postings about our upcoming field trip, our bird walks that are coming up this Saturday, and then also the 7th and 8th of September. The first Sunday of September actually is the first, and it's right before Labor Day, so we skipped that Sunday and we're going to the following one. We will also have a booth at the Youth and Family Day that will be at the Douglas Center on September 14th as part of the Indiana Dunes National Parks outdoor adventure. So stop by and see us, and if you'd like to volunteer to help out with that, just send us a little email. So if there's no other questions, I will stop our live streaming and we will wrap things